for dialogic science and first author of over 200 articles, books, and book chapters. This is in brief about Hubert Hermans. Now, Hermans, I will invite you, take your floor.
Thank you very much for this extensive introduction, Kanta. And I'm sitting here at the border between the Netherlands and Germany. And the notion of border as a concept will come back several times in this presentation. So right away, I want to present you my thesis in this presentation. My thesis is that we are living in a time of climate change and corona pandemics, and this can function as a wake-up call for an extended identity definition. So my question to you is, can we look above the fence, right? The fence, which is a border between individual identities and the external world, and between group identities. Are there more identities than individual and group identities? That will be the center, the nucleus of my presentation. Finally, I will present you a concept with which I will end, namely dialogical flexibility. So my proposal is that we need an increased dialogical flexibility as an answer to the main challenges of this time. Well, I'm particularly interested in the Western self, the Western ideal of the self. And let's have a look what other people, what other scientists, how they define and qualify the Western self. Clifford Geertz is a cultural anthropologist. He characterized the Western self as a bounded, unique, more or less integrated, motivational and cognitive universe, a dynamic center of awareness, emotion, judgment, and action, organized into a distinctive whole, and set contrastively both against other such wholes and against a social and natural background. Note that he talks not only about the social, but also a natural background. So this poses the question, what is the relationship between the self and nature, the self and the earth? Let's have a look at Joseph Dunne. He was a philosopher and he characterized the Western self as a Cartesian self in terms of a rational knower, immediately, transparently, and irrefutably present to itself as a pure extensionless consciousness, already established in being without a body and with no acknowledged complicity in language, culture, and community. This is an important point because we could pose that the self, there is no fixed and universal definition of the self. The self is dependent on culture. It's different in different cultures, and it's also bound to history. So in the course of time, in the course of history, the definitions of the self may change. Now we come to also to a psychologist, Edward Sampson, who described the Western ideal image of the self as an entity with razor-sharp boundaries between self and non-self, with the exclusion of the other as an intrinsic participant in the self and as persistently involved in the pursuit of having the environment under control. So keep these three things: razor-sharp boundaries, exclusion of the other, and the environment under control. Okay, so here we see from three perspectives a view on the self with a separation between self and other. Well, the dialogical self theory can be summarized in just one sentence. I give you the nuclear definition of the dialogical self. It is conceived as a dynamic multiplicity of eye positions. So it's dynamic. There's a multiplicity of eye positions. So there is not simply a unity. The unity is the result of the dialogue between a multiplicity of eye positions in the society of mind. So the self is conceived here, a bit unusual, as a society of mind. So as there can be dialogical relationships and interactions between people in society, there can be dialogical relationships between different eye positions in the self. So keep this definition because we need it later in this presentation. This is the model. So we have 4 levels of inclusion. I as an individual, we as group members, we as human beings, and we as participants of the earth. So there are not only I positions, but also we positions. And of course, like history is having an enormous influence on our self-definitions, we positions organize and influence the variety and the multiplicity of I positions. So have a look at this overview. We have different levels. I as an individual, which means I position myself as an individual and as different from other people. Often we talk about the uniqueness of the self. This is the individual level. And we have a corresponding responsibility. I have to take care of myself. So an individual responsibility. We as group members, we position, I position myself as a group member and as different from other groups. So there is an enormous literature in the psychology on the individual level. Think about thousands of studies of self-esteem, and there is an enormous variety of studies, social identity theory, about in-groups and out-groups, also by sociologists. So in psychology, there is a heavy emphasis on I as the individual and I as a group member. But there is not much work on the level of human being, we as members of a human family. And there is not much work in psychology, we as participants of the earth. I position myself as part of the earth that is common to all of us, very relevant to the notion of climate change. Now, sometimes I pose a question to you, you can answer it for yourself. What is your usual identity definition? Have you more than one? Have you only one identity definition, or have you more identity definitions? That's my question to you. Think of it before you can pose questions to me. So let's now have a look at the individual level. We start with the individual, then I go to the group level, then I go to the human level, and then finally to the ecological level. There is a lot of interest in happiness studies and studies on well-being, which means that individuals take care of their own happiness and well-being. This is the individual level, my own happiness and well-being. When you look at the literature, you see 2 streams of thought. One is on hedonic happiness, which is the dominance of positive over negative emotions. And there is also an eudaimonic happiness inspired by Aristotle in the form of personal growth, self-actualization, autonomy, and vitality. What is the difference between the two? The first one, hedonic happiness, is more short-term. And the second one, eudaimonic happiness, is more long-term. It has to do with my growth, my self-actualization. Let's now for a moment keep the definition of the dialogical self in mind. Let's try for a moment to translate these concepts into a dynamic multiplicity of I positions and counter positions in the self as a society of mind. Let's take a very simple example. I feel happy by positioning myself as a gourmet. I like good food, right? But from a meta position, when I look at myself from an external perspective, when I take more distance towards myself, when I have an overview of all my I positions, which is a meta position, then I know that I'm eating and drinking too much. So there is a conflict in the self. From the perspective of hedonic happiness, I like the food, but from the perspective of eudaimonic happiness, in this case, a meta position, a long-term meta position, I think it's not good to take too much food. So what I want to say here is that dialogical self theory is able to relate, to create a dynamic relationship between different I positions, I as hedonic person, and I as a person who wants to grow, takes care of my development. I go now to the group level. Lovers may use bodily metaphors. What I mean here, two people is the smallest group, a dyad. Smallest group is you and me and the way we are related. So lovers may tell to each other, you are my heart, or you are in my heart, or you are the air I breathe, which means in terms of the dialogical self theory, the other is not simply outside the self, the other is an other I position in the self. So the other person is part of, in the terms of William James, of an extended self. So people in the external world are parts of the extended self. Now we take it a bit broader. A person can be adopted as an external position in the selves of members of a group or community. Individuals, for it's an example, individuals knowing that their brothers and sisters know that their deceased parents continue to have a precious place in their hearts, feel united with each other. Even when they have arguments or conflicts, people of a family have in common the same parents. And the parents are in my heart, and we share, as different brothers and sisters, we share the same parents, which are part of our extended self. Even a bit broader to society, Sunil Bhatia, an Indian American, he studied successful Indian Americans. They have a high degree of training as engineers, medical doctors, scientists, and university professors in American society. However, at the same time, they feel that they are seen as racially different and as not real Americans. That's what he found. They felt not only different, but also the same as members of the American majority. They seem to simultaneously accept and resist their minority position, being involved what he calls a double-voiced interchange, a double-voiced dialogue between their minority voices and the majority's dominant voices, which means that this majority dominant voice is part of the extended self. So we have here some examples of the group levels. It's just to have your attention. When you look at this picture, you see that the woman closes her eyes. I think in situations of deep love, then there is a two-way movement. There is a movement to the other person. You see the woman caresses the man with her hand. She is going to the outside, but at the same time, she is going to the inside. She closes her eyes. So in the deeper layers of the self space, the other person is in my heart. And when she caresses the man, she goes at the same time to the depths of her own self space. Okay, now we go to the human level. Is there something, and this is more, all the things I said are quite well known. What I will say now is less known, and I want to ask your attention for this. Is there a kind of level, an identity level, referring to we as humans. Sam McFarland and colleagues, they did interesting research. They noticed that all humans as one big family developed slowly since the late 15th century. The geographic discoveries of America, Africa, and Asia unleashed the brutalization and enslavement of their inhabitants, but this is the point, but also gave rise to the awareness that the human race is a single collectivity. So the human race as a single collectivity. They developed even a measurement device, which they called the identification with all humanity. This scale consisting of 3 response items in the following form. How do you identify with, feel a part of, feel love towards, have concern for? Each of the following. There are 3 possibilities. People in your community, people of your country, there was a noise suddenly. All humans everywhere. Or another example, when they are in need, how much do you want to help people in your community, for example, your neighborhood, people of your country, and people all over the world. So you can, with this measurement, you can find out to what extent people are oriented, people are concerned with humanity as a whole. They have even some empirical findings. The instrument predicted support for human rights. So people with this human orientation, they are much concerned about universal human rights. Individuals high on this measure valued the lives of out-group members more. So here is an important point. People who have this concern about humanity, they go over the fence of the separation of the in-group and the out-group members. I think this is a very important point, that it's possible to transgress, to go beyond the strict separation between in-groups and out-groups. Also, these people pledged larger contributions for international humanitarian relief. So members of charity organizations were pretty high on this measure. Again, a question for you. Do you know a situation in which you identify with all humanity? So think about a situation where you identified with all humanity. Do you know such a situation for yourself? I go to the ecological level, which is the most timely one for climate change and the corona pandemic, and other pandemics may be emerge in the future. Here is the famous photo Earthrise, made by Apollo 17, and it's a photo from 1968. This photo is probably more representative of our time than, for example, the famous photo of the burning of the towers, the Twin Towers in the United States. We see here a photo from the moon, and the Earth is a tiny spot at this big, immense, dark background. And it evokes a very strong concern in the viewers of this Earth. And let's have a look what Carl Sagan was an astronomist, and he was very much concerned about climate change. And what he said: consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility. Here's the term I already showed, ecological responsibility, to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we have ever known. This is a newly born panda in the hands of a worker. And when you look at the photo, you can see a small animal. But suppose I ask you, can you try to be that animal? Can you go into the skin of this small animal and then look to the world and look to the future? Please try. When I do that, then this is a quite powerful emotional experience. And if you do it, and if you have this feeling, then you have an example of what it is that an animal is not simply an external thing, an external being. The animal is an other I. So the animal is an other I as part of the self. You see, in this way, it's possible to extend the self to an ecological level. It's not necessary to become an astronaut to have this feeling. You can have it when you are really in nature, when you are in your garden, when you are in the beauty of your environment. Yeah. So Yaden and Yaden, they introduced a new term, which is not very well known, and the concept is the overview effect. This is more than just an aesthetic experience, because aesthetic beauty by itself does not necessarily lead to long-term changes. The overview effect, it triggers a self-transcendent experience characterized by reduced self-salience and increased awareness of connection. So when you have this overview effect, which you can also have when you are in nature, then you become smaller, you become tiny element, and this will say this self-worth and self-importance and this personal excellence recedes to the background. And the boundaries between self and non-self become more opened. During these states of mind, people can find the bond with other individuals, humankind, and the earth. So the bond with the earth can be felt. Now back to the theory. The overview effect is a special metaposition with transcendent qualities. So a metaposition, taking distance from your specific eye positions, having an overview of your eye positions, and it prevents a long-term overview, so that we become temporarily liberated from the successive stream of specific positions that each have their limited horizon. This is a theoretical statement that every eye position has its limited horizon. So I'm in the position of a teacher. I'm in the position of a professor. Later, I'm in the position of a father, a grandfather, a professional. All those positions create a particular perspective, a specific perspective to the world, but they have also their horizons. Well, during these identifications with humanity and with ecology, with the earth and with nature, we transcend these boundaries. So a metaposition can be stimulated and can be triggered by, for example, artistic pictures like this one. It can also be triggered by transcendent experiences. And then we are liberated from the successive stream of specific positions. We are liberated from I prisons. Now, okay, this is an important point. I want to give you what I see a strong argument for the view that there is a multiplicity of levels, different levels of inclusiveness. Why is it important to keep all four of them, not one of them, not two of them, three, all four of them are necessary? Why? There is a dialogical flexibility in the body, but also in the mind. Don't underestimate a cat. A cat can also be very, very flexible. Also, this is a very unusual picture. There is dialogical flexibility if the self recognizes the existence and unique value of the identity levels. So you must first know that the level exists in yourself. And moreover, to access its unique quality. And able and willing to move, here's the movement, the positioning and repositioning, from one level of inclusiveness to another level, and back, dependent on the situation at hand. For example, I buy something. I'm implicitly in the position of I as a consumer, but I could also be in the position as I as a responsible citizen, I as a responsible world citizen, which calls for the humanity, the human level. Or another example, I'm very concerned about my own group, my own country, but also I'm concerned about things as a human being. Sometimes I'm in a conflict. What will I choose? The advantage of my own group or the advantage of humanity as a whole? A multi-level identity encourages dialogical flexibility to move from one level of inclusiveness to another one in a way that prevents any fixed or rigidly closed identity. Here's another concept of the dialogical self theory, I prison. When I'm located in one level only, and I'm fixed there, it can work as an I prison. The positions located at different identity levels place the self in a field of uncertainty. Here the point is, here we come to the notion of uncertainty. So the four levels, if we recognize them and we move from the one to the other level, it makes us uncertain. Is that a problem? Perhaps. Uncertainty is generally an unpleasant feeling. However, it's not only negative, it's also constructive. Uncertainty may be associated with some negative feelings, but it also broadens the horizon of the self towards different and new positions. When we are uncertain, the world goes more open, and I see a broader variety of I positions. And that's exactly what we need in terms of different I positions corresponding with different levels of inclusiveness. Again, a question to you. Did you ever have the experience that you could move from one identity level to another one? Do you know it? That you moved from one identity level to another one? Question for you. Yeah. Restriction. Yeah, I come to one of the most important arguments in my presentation, namely that restriction and perseverance to one level only would lead to some form of overpositioning. This is another concept in the theory. Overpositioning is that a particular position goes to its overdrive, becomes exaggerated, becomes overly strong with the risk that other positions are subordinated. So, have a look here. When we would have an individual identity only, then we see that a narcissistic or megalomaniacal individual is frozen at the individual level and lacks the empathy needed to put themselves in the shoes of another individual and take their interest into account. So, narcissism is often called the disease of our time. This has to do with extreme individualism, and which means is overpositioning at the individual level. What happens when there would be a social identity only? We know that very well, a glorification of differences and groupthink. Looking at other groups via the clouded lenses of our own prejudices. So what we see at this moment in many countries is an extreme polarization, political polarization, separation. Look, for example, what happened in the United States in the past decade, an enormous opposition, differences, separations, and even strong polarization. This means that people are located and stuck at the social identity only. Even when we would take the human identity only, this may neglect the fact that people derive self-esteem and emancipatory claims from group membership and deny humans' innate tendency to tribalism. This is an evolutionary argument that we all have the tendency to feel member of a tribe, of a group, where we feel at home. We need the individual level and social level to give the person a particular kind of certainty to be able to tolerate the larger uncertainty of the larger levels. When there would be the ecological identity only, then we would be motivated by anxiety and apocalyptic pessimism, which means the risk of neglecting the importance of economic factors and finances needed for healthcare, job security, and environmental protection. We need the economy in the service of ecology. Yeah, okay. No, but when I was preparing this talk, and I did a lot of study, books, and discussions, and thinking, made a lot of notes, and writing articles, and then suddenly I came a very striking statement, and the statement is of a person you all know, and he could give, no, he couldn't, he gave the best summary of my talk. And I want to read this, speech of him, which he published somewhere in the 50s. I think it's the best summary of my presentation. A human being is a part of a whole, called by us universe. A part limited in time and space, limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us. Here we have the I prison and the we prison, restricting us to our personal desires. This is the individual level. And to affection for a few persons nearest to us, the group level. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion. This is my argument of extension of the self. To embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. So the whole of nature, and then he has even an artistic argument. So the beauty of the nature helps us to transcend the individual and the group level. Well, I like this I like the statement very much because I think it includes the essence. So it's more than, it's 70 years ago that he made a statement. And it's something which is needed now, today. This presentation was part of my book, Liberation in the Face of Uncertainty, a new development in dialogical self-theory. But the book encompasses much more. And this is one of the important parts of that book. And I worked on it several years. And I became very aware of the necessity to extend the self, to open the self to broader identity levels. Finally, and this is something I would love to have your attention for. 2 years ago, we started our renewed International Society for Dialogical Science. And I would like to ask you if you would like to become a member of this society. And what can we offer to you? We can offer that you become a member of a recognized international community of scientists. You have contact with colleagues worldwide who have similar interests. And this is the main point, you support our purpose of stimulating dialogical relationships. So the Dialogical Self project tries to stimulate dialogical relationships, not only between people, between countries, with the nature, but also within the self. And my presentation today was the dialogical self, the different positions in the self. In a dialogical way, we broaden them and we create a new relationship with nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hubert. Would you like to take questions now, Hubert?
Can we start with the questions?
Yeah. You can close the screen so that you can see the chat also, if you want, or I can also help you.
Yes, okay. Yes, okay. Yes, fine. Good.
As you were talking, there was one question I noticed. What is the difference between
Yes.
I position and meta position?
I position and?
Meta position.
The difference between? Sorry, I cannot understand.
Yeah, difference between meta position and I position.
Oh, meta position and I position, yes. Suppose you go into a helicopter and then you look down, you see all those lands, right? Different parts. When you are on the earth, you see only this spot, right? A meta position means that you go into a helicopter and you look at the multiplicity of your eye positions at the same time. So a meta position means that you take distance from a multiplicity of eye positions, which means that you are able to create and see the links between the different eye positions. So eye positions are very specific. I as a teacher, I as a father, I as a sports lover, I as a lover of music of Beethoven, etc., etc. I as a gourmet, right? Going to a meta position, I see the multiplicity of positions from a distance, and I can become aware about my development and the development of the earth in the long run. Okay, this is an answer to your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there other questions?
I would invite all of you if you want to.
Yes, I see Eric has a question.
Eric is asking.
Eric.
Mute. You are in mute, Eric.
Eric,
You're able to
unmute.
unmute yourself now.
Yes, I hear you.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. When you speak of dialogue, to what extent is this related to the concept of dialogue of David Bohm, where he speaks of continuous flowing movements, in which I don't have the precise definition at hand, but in which he speaks of continuous flowing movement in which new perspectives may arise. That's the
right. Yeah,
logic of it.
This is a point that is so important for me that I wrote a specific chapter about it. And the chapter is in my 2018 book, Society in the Self. Society in the Self. A new theory of identity in democracy. And I was strongly puzzled by the difference between David Bohm. I read his beautiful small booklet on dialogue, right?
Yeah.
And I read also the works of Mikhail Bakhtin. And I was impressed by the differences between the two authors. And my conclusion is that dialogical self theory could learn a lot from these two authors. One of the most important differences is that for Bakhtin, whole life from its beginning is dialogical. So when you are born, then you are already part of a dialogical relationship with your parents, with your environment, with the animals. You know, that's not the case for Bohm. For Bohm, he realizes that dialogue is something which is not there. It's not just a given in human nature. It has to be learned. So that's what he likes to do with his small groups. That kind of encounter group where people realized that they do not have enough capacities, not enough means to take the position of the other, and moreover, relay the positions in such a way that something new is created. For Bohm, dialogue is generative dialogue in two respects. It creates something new, which is not yet there, and it creates also commonality between people who did not meet each other before. So while Bakhtin has a very general conception of dialogue, life is dialogue, and to be in life is to be in dialogue, while for Bohm, he realizes that the world is lacking the cement of the dialogue, and he tries to create it by teaching people how to dialogue with each other.
An interesting interpretation, because I don't want to go deeply into this because it'll take too much space, but I never have interpreted Bohm's work as saying that this natural the natural propensity for dialogue is not there. For me, it's always about the separation is constructed. The idea of separation is constructed.
Yes, the separation is constructive as a beginning, but not, there is a reason that he uses the metaphor of the cement, okay? So his purpose is that the different stones in society, which are separated in the beginning, need some glue in order to come together. So separation, in his view, as I see it, is a good beginning, but it's not the end. So becoming aware that you have a separate view on the world and that the other person is different from you, which some theorists would call the alterity of the other, the fact that the other is different from mine, and then accepting the other in his or her difference is fundamental to his notion of dialogue.
I have a question, Hubert.
Yes.
This is Uma Jain. To the extent that I am able to understand the whole theory that you have presented, I am finding a lot of commonality between what Indian spirituality talks about or proposes to do for human development, in which ultimately the evolution is that the human being experiences the whole universe within herself or himself. Now, there is a specific path towards it, yoga, meditation, and one important role is of the guru, who is himself or herself a realized soul. Now, in this dialogic theory, what is the path towards that last stage that you have talked about? What's
Yeah.
the method? What is the route towards reaching that level? I mean, the way I am visualizing it is that is the level of humanness that this theory would like to take human beings to, where they have the whole humanity and lives on the planet and the environment within
Yes.
them and within their whatever you would like to call it, I'm not able to, like, in their, hold it in their heart.
Yes. When I understand your question, it's how can we move to these broader levels of inclusiveness?
Yeah, in your theory, because in India we know that this happens through spiritual practices in which guru plays a role, who is a living or realized soul.
Yes. Well, I think what you said about Indian spirituality is a very important point here. And maybe that touches a deeper issue, which makes us think about the differences between cultures. In the last chapters of the book I presented to you, I was very happy to see that several people, several colleagues, applied the dialogical self theory in different cultures, in non-Western cultures, right? Indian, native Indian culture, Chinese culture, Japanese culture, and African culture. And there is indeed interesting work by Nandita Chaudhary, which is an Indian colleague, and she applied the dialogical self theory to Indian families and Indian child rearing. What you say about Indian spirituality, actually I see it as an interface between Western culture and Eastern culture, or cultures in plural, because this Indian spirituality presents us as Westerners with a challenge which touches one of the, what I see, the most weakest points of Western conceptions of the self, which I proposed in the beginning of my talk, that the Western self has this sharp boundaries, which is not sharp in Indian spirituality, sharp boundaries. The other is located purely outside. In Indian spirituality, probably you feel united with the environment, with the earth. And also having, in the Western self, having the environment under control, which is different from being a participant in the earth and in nature. So I suppose that when Western people would learn more, became more interested, and also on a practical level, referring to Indian spirituality, that would be a kind of linkage between the cultures where there are new dialogical possibilities, I think.
Right.
Yes,
Arabic.
okay.
Yeah, Kanta, are you saying anything?
No, I said you
Okay.
carry on.
Yeah. Mine is not so much of a question, Professor Hubert, but when I was listening to the multiplicity of eyes, I was mentally comparing, for example, with Jung's theory of personality in terms of persona, ego, shadow, anima, animus, archetype, self, soul, and so on. Or if you look at Freud's similar multiplicity of eyes, their various parts, conscious, unconscious, subconscious, and ego, superego. When you even from a extended group angle, I mean this theory of inclusion, control, and affection. If at a larger level, if you see the inclusion talks about layers of inclusion. So group may go from one layer of inclusion to a deeper layer of inclusion to a deeper, still deeper layer of inclusion, and that's how the model becomes cyclic. And when you talk about that last thing in terms of the whole humanity, I was comparing mentally the stages of affection in this theory of inclusion, control, and affection at a world level. I mean, ICA is more meant for the group level working, but if you magnify this, then I was seeing quite a few parallels between what you were talking, or even, for example, if you take transactional analysis, the various ego states and all, the multiplicity of eyes and so on. So that's what was going on in my head when you were talking. But I found what you were talking very, very insightful.
Thank you very much. Yeah, these are very relevant and interesting considerations. There are several things in your talk. One thing is particularly interesting for me. You talked about the shadows of Jung, right? And you also talked about the distinction between conscious and unconscious or subconscious. And that was not so much included in my talk, but I give a strong emphasis in dialogical self theory on the so-called shadow positions. So I try to translate the notion of shadow versus persona in Jung's work into shadow positions and shining positions as at the opposite. The problem for the eye is that particularly when particular positions, particular experiences are not accepted and are repressed in the unconscious, or people are somewhere in the middle in a kind of subconscious layer, then there are many eye positions the person is not aware of. So maybe I gave this small example of when we buy something, well, I do not see, well, I'm now in the position of a consumer. It's self-evident, I buy something, right? But the position I as a citizen, or I as a world citizen, of I as part of nature, it can be implicit. It's not actualized. It's not a result of teaching. It's not a result of education, at least not in our country. And then when people know that this position exists, they have the possibility to include them in a kind of internal dialogue, which results in particular decisions. So also shadow positions. So say the side which I see as bad in myself. Sorry, the side I see as bad in myself, as undesirable in myself. It's for a fully fledged dialogical self, it's very important that these implicit or even repressed I positions are entering the dialogical space so that I can relate in a dialogical way to the bad sides of myself. So in many books, also in many artistic books, this is discussed. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a very strong artistic example, also a very psychological, valuable example of a person who is not able to accept his shadow side. So I wanted to go into your distinction between conscious and unconscious, which I strongly would like to emphasize. Yeah. And another point, you talked about the group level. Well, I said that the group level is important also for the human level. Suppose I'm a father of 2 children, and as a father of 2 children, I can imagine, I need my imagination, of a person at the other side of the world, which is an out-group. Also, that person can be a father of 2 children. And when I use my motivation and my feelings for the small group I'm living in, father of my children, I can place this experience in a broader context and see that many other people, also of our groups, are fathers or mothers of children. So the group level can be used as an entrance to strengthen and to open the human level.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Hubert, we have 1
Beautifully
minute.
said. Beautifully said,
question.
Hubert. Professor, just one small little question.
I had a question. I was waiting. Sorry.
Yeah, we have run out of time. Can we extend it?
Sushma is the next person to go. So Sushma, you are managing the integration. You will have to tell us.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we can't give more time to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
It's
thought
very-
you would be kind and say that, okay, we'll take 10 minutes from my session.
You want to take 10 more minutes?
No,
Hey, I was thinking that you will be kind and say that, but you are pretty mean.
No, we'll be eating into the next session.
Yeah.
I normally, you know, don't respond to expectations. So
I think we'll call it off.
This
Yeah.
is very
So
nice.
it accumulated a lot of thoughts and ideas and questions.
yeah.
I would love to carry on with this, but I know,
Okay, we can spend 5 more minutes.
yeah. Hubert,
Thank you.
Go
we'll
ahead,
have
Jasmeet.
5 minutes.
Go ahead, you got 5 minutes. Jasmeet, go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you, Harish. Thank you, Sushma. Professor Hubert, I really appreciate the way you kind of brought in Uma's question, but my question is actually linked to what Uma had said, that the question is about that we know the Indian side or the Asian, the ancient Indian side, but in dialogical self theory, her question was more about how do you talk about the progression to the overview effect, to the ecological level? Is that what you're proposing, that the ultimate aim is to reach that overview effect? And how would you reach that? Or is it that it's learning to hold all the dialogues at all the levels as a human being? So what is your ultimate aim and how do you get there? I think that was the question I was really intrigued by.
Well, my ultimate aim is not simply going to higher level, and certainly not to forget the lower level. The dialogical idea comes in the moving from one level
Position to position.
to another level and position and back. Because in
Right.
going back, which is expressed also in but sentences, okay, as a group member, I think this, but, as a part of the humanity, I think differently. And can I relate them together? Can I bring them together? So my goal is not simply going to the highest level, because I think there is a big risk. There is some very recent research by 2 Italian investigators. When you invite people to be on the human level only, then there is a kind of automatic need for my individual position or my group position. I feel lost in this enormous, broad human level, and I need some fixity. I need some hold on the individual level or the group level. However, by going out of it, going to a higher level or broader level and back, I have the possibility to keep this fixity, this hold in the smaller levels.
Thank you for the clarification. Harish, please go ahead.
Yeah. So my question is more connected with this body which you mentioned where we can reach out. SIS it was, right? And have you done some work in the corporate world with, we talk so much of corporate governance and all. I'm quite keen about that. So has it been attempted to be brought this consciousness in the boardrooms?
Not yet.
Not
as
yet.
far, in my experience, not yet.
I see a lot of potential there because today, whenever we talk of ecology and responsibility, the buck stops with the big corporates, which kind of control almost all the natural resources today. And the very concept of the economic development, so to speak, using your term, is defined in hedonistic terms.
Right.
So, and that was my curiosity to know. I will certainly write to you and reach out to you separately.
Harish, I would like to share that I have, in a little way, I've used Dialogical Self in my work as a part of my PhD, and also in the corporate consulting life. In the areas where two companies merge, how do we use Dialogical Self? And I published this paper as part of my research. It has been very, very exciting, and people understood immediately at their experience level. You don't have to spend much time explaining the concept.
Yeah, that's right. Right. Well, you point us to a good future. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor. I am looking forward to getting in touch with you and your team.
Yeah, when you would like to write me, or you, even when you want to have the whole presentation, when you write me an email, I will send you the whole presentation. You can find my email address in Hubert Hermans' homepage. Hubert Hermans' homepage. So please contact me, because I like this discussion with you very, very, very much. It's very gratifying. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I have a quick question. May I ask?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I found the theory and philosophy very interesting, but I was just wanting to ask you whether you have any interest in developing experimental procedures also for managing these different levels of self-identification. For instance, in ISABs, I believe we have some experience of moving between the individual and the small group levels. Through the lab, which we conduct for 3 or 4 days, there is a kind of experimentation in moving between self and small group in terms of identification.
I see.
So at points during the group, a person would feel a complete group member, and at other times would feel. So I was thinking though of larger levels when you think of moving from the group to the community, and have you ever thought of experimental procedures that would be helpful?
Well, I do a lot of thinking, but my actions are behind. So, but when you would do such work, I would strongly be interested to become involved. Sure.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Hubert, for your information, we have started in a small way in ISAPS in the research group, trying to understand and apply Dialogical Self in the work we do. It's in a very nascent stage, in a pilot stage, and I see a huge potential for this. Unlike the conventional psychological concepts which come from outside in, when I see dialogic self from inside out, it opens different paradigms. It opens different paradigms, and it becomes closer to our Indian Advaitic philosophy.
Yes, that would be really great. Yeah.
Thank
I'm
you
very
so much.
interested.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
I think time is up. We would have loved to carry on. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Krishna, for extending that time.
Greeting
Thank you
from
all.
the Netherlands. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.